Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's talk with the UK Crime Book Club. My name is Paul Gitsham. I am the author of the DCI Warren Jones series of novels, the latest of which, Out of Sight, was released 2 months ago as an ebook, but is being released Thursday as audiobook and paperback. So this evening, I have the pleasure of chatting with Malk WIlliams. Now, Malk has done the audio narration for all of my previous book so far. So this is the 7th book that he has narrated. And I must say, I'm very much looking forward to this evening's chat. I think a lot of us, that people that we look out there and we see audiobooks, they're a bit of a black box. We're not quite sure what goes into making an audiobook. We don't know how one goes about it. And I think tonight, I'm just really looking forward to seeing what Malk's got to say about this, and perhaps giving some of us a few tips on things to do and don't do when thinking about a book that might one day become an audiobook. So, Malk, I'll let you introduce yourself a bit more.
Oh, thanks very much, Paul. My name is Malk WIlliams. I've been an audiobook narrator for quite a few years, and I was a storyteller in my spare time for quite a long time before that. I've done, probably a bit over 100 audiobooks now, so I've had a bit of practice, and probably about a third of those have been detective fiction, murder mystery type things. I was actually looking back at my my record before this to see what I've done. I've actually surprised myself in quite how much I have done. It's one flows into another sometimes, but I like to think I'm fairly good at it. People give me money to read stories, and occasionally I get awards, which is
what's not to like. What's not to like? Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You said that at least a third have been crime. And do you find yourself particularly drawn to that genre, or is it just a reflection of the fact, obviously, that crime fiction is particularly popular?
Well, I'm to an extent at the mercy of casting directors. There's a number of production companies that I work with on a regular basis, and there's at least 2, maybe 3 casting directors who clearly have decided that I have a good voice for crime fiction because they keep pushing them in my direction.
Take that how you will.
As Warren Jones is a very good example. Crime writers often, once they get going, they carry on going. There's, their detectives will find a murder every few months or so, and it requires another book. And so once you get started, then you tend to carry on. I mean, I do enjoy detective fiction. I mean, there's different types. It's not, if I had to pick my favorite genre, it's not the one that I'd probably go for straight away. My reflex reaction is probably more science fiction and fantasy, but it is something that's always been sort of a part of the DNA. It's I think there is something, although obviously you get crime fiction set in all parts of the world, I think there is something quite British about detective fiction. Sherlock Holmes, Agatha Christie, all of these things. There is something that is very much really bred to the bone in the British psyche about detective fiction.
We are brought up on it as children as well. I mean, so many of, I'm sure, of the listeners have actually read Enid Blyton, for example.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is obviously quintessentially English and entertained generations of children. I mean, once you moved on from Noddy, then most of our stuff could be classified as crime fiction. And I know it's certainly what I used to start. The Americans do have their traditions. I mean, the Hardy Boys. Was one that I was brought up with, Nancy Drew. Again, I very much liked her. But I think there's something to be said for the sort of British
of course, Americans have the whole noir subgenre, which is very American. I'm not trying to say that Britain lays claim to the entire genre, but I think there is something, and especially about the British voice for narrating. There's something about the gravitas that that a British voice has. that tends to lend itself towards that, even if the character voices are different.
I must admit, I mean, I did smile when you said about, you know, how they seem to find a body every few months, and I haven't actually sat down and tallied up, but when you consider how small Middlesbrough is, the fictional Hertfordshire town where Warren plies his trade, it has a hell of a murder. It's like the Bronx. I mean, it's, you know, there's every year there's at least one good meaty murder, sometimes more than one, and yeah, it's getting a little bit like Midsummer. I mean, this is full length number 7, and there's 4 shorter novellas as well, which you haven't done yourself.
Yeah.
And Warren's been there. Let's see, he's been there 5 or 6 years now. So it's 2 or 3 people dead a year. It works out at an average if you tally up everyone in the books. And next year's book is pretty blood sudden. So we just say that it has a lot of deaths in it. So that's going to push the average up even further.
I did notice in the most recent book, Warren's dad does make a wry comment about the murder rate in Middlesbrough. So I can kind of tell that you're getting a little bit conscious of how many dead bodies are lying around there.
You do get a little bit conscious occasionally. I mean, you know, his grandfather basically says, you know, that I've forgotten how busy you've been since you moved down there. But there's other things that you get conscious about as well. I mean, I'm forever being told by people, well, he's a DCI, so he wouldn't really be interviewing people or going out. And I'm thinking, yeah, I know that, but there's the problem we have in crime fiction is that our central protagonist, even though he is surrounded by a team, and we'll talk about team later on, because obviously you keep on coming back to them every year. My central protagonist has to be a little bit of an everyman, and you know, you could do if you wanted to be absolutely strictly accurate, and you wanted somebody who's going to be hands-on, doing all the interviewing, doing all the running after thieves and stuff like that. Really, you need a detective constable, possibly a detective sergeant. The problem is that whilst they are specialists in their field and they are very well regarded, particularly these days, detective constables with an interviewing speciality. I mean, they are experts at interviewing. It's what they do. The problem is that I need an everyman, but also I do want someone with a bit of authority, because he has to be able to lead the case. Now, these days, there's a computer system called Holmes 2, which is their case management system. And in fact, Holmes 2 suggests what the next course of action should be. It literally spits out lists of jobs, and the case manager tells you to go and do those jobs. Now, that would be a little bit dull, unless I was going to be decided to give Holmes the personality of Hal from 2001. You know, it's a bit dull.
Yeah,
so I do need
money on who the murderer would be if you did that.
But... yeah, we'd kind of give it away, wouldn't it? Yeah, it's my brother, Hal 8000. Yeah, you do need somebody with some authority who can make strategic decisions, and which pushes it a bit further up the tree. So, and then I don't want to put it too high, because actually I do quite like having him sometimes being told what to do. So at the end of the day, DCI is this kind of middle rank that allows him to give orders, be told what to do as well, and then I just fudge it. And in fact, I have got a bit self-conscious. So it will be explained in the books these days about how Middlesbrough, which is a small CID unit in the outskirts of Hertfordshire, is a unique first responder CID unit. And that goes back to a very early decision I had to make when I realised that all of the major crime units for Hertfordshire, Bedfordshire, and now Cambridgeshire are merged into one and are in one building, Welwyn Garden City. So my setup, and I was already, 25, 30,000 words into this story, my setup doesn't work. I need Warren to have a small team below him and one or two people, if that, above him. And so I thought, could I have a small unit that kind of does its own thing, its first response? And a retired police officer friend sort of went, it sounds like the sort of thing we do. So I thought I'll take that as a glowing endorsement of my idea. And then from that, it kind of grew out the idea. I thought, well, hang on a second. If it's a unique first responder, then let's have Warren being a little bit unique. So I do like to put a few sly references in. You know,
no,
like,
I think I've been doing the Warren books for a few years. You know, as in the first place a reader, and I do like the device of Middlesbrough as this. You know, it's a fictional town, and you make it clear that it is an exception to the normal rules, and it does give you a certain amount of flexibility. And I think, you know, as a literary conceit, then it works really well.
Yeah, and I think one of the most telling things is that I haven't, touch wood, had any snide remarks in reviews about, you know, this DCI is doing everything. But of course, we all know they wouldn't do that in real life. Yeah, because I headed it off at the pass, and that was what it was all about. It was in part saying, right, there are going to be those the armchair detectives who sit there and go, well, of course, it wouldn't really happen that way. And I think, okay, fair enough. I'll cut you off at the knees before you do that. But it's just now it's each book. It's trying to how do I get this explanation across without sounding too repetitive. But I have a bit of fun with his peers as well, who are very jealous actually, because you know, as I was just writing, I'm writing book 9 at the moment, so this will be summer 23. And there is a point where he's talking to another police officer, another person the same rank, who asks if he's had his wings clipped yet, and he's no, you know, still going. And he just wistfully says, "Oh, I haven't had a good poke around a crime scene for ages." Yeah, so that, I mean, that's, I think it would be nice to actually talk a little bit about how you got into this. Now, I'm fascinated. You mentioned casting directors, because I was going to ask some questions about how do you get selected? Do you bid for jobs, or are you on a sort of register? Not that sort of register. A register where they know what you're good at, and so you get called up. I mean, how does it work?
Okay, I mean, there's various different ways. If anyone's thinking about doing audiobook narration, well, the first thing to say to that is, before you commit to doing that as a job, there's a audiobook trainer called Sean Allen Pratt who recommends what you do is you get a book, you go and sit in a cupboard, and you start reading. And every time you make a mistake, you go back to the beginning of the sentence, and then you start reading again. And if you come across a word that you don't recognize and you're not sure how to pronounce it, you go and look it up, do not guess, and then go back to your cupboard, carry on reading. And do that for several hours at a time, for several hours a day, until you finished. And by the time you finished it, if you still want to be an audiobook narrator, possibly there's something in it for you. But it really is. It is a long, lonely slog. It's not for everybody. I know a lot of voiceovers who do adverts and, you know, corporate videos and things, which I do from time to time, but they wouldn't touch audiobooks with a barge pole. It's just too much like hard work. But that said, people getting started, the easiest way to get started is probably through a system called ACX, which is a subsidiary of Audible. And you can basically set yourself up as an audiobook narrator, record a few samples, put yourself on there. And people, mostly independent authors who may have self-published, or they may have published through a publishing house but retain the audio rights to their books, will then sort of audition them, or they'll put them on a list that you can search by genre or whatever, or by voice type, depending on what you are, by the accent that they want, by the style that they want, and you can record an audition, send it to them. Most of them are royalty share, which is good as long as the book sells. If it doesn't, you can spend 3 or 4 weeks of your life and be getting about, you know, 3 bob and a pickled egg once a month for the next 9 years, which isn't going to pay the rent. I know, I've been there. But the position I'm in now, once you've got a few books under your belt, then you start approaching production companies. There's a few in the UK, there's a few more in the States, and hopefully one of them will listen and think, oh, that sounds good, and think that, that you're suitable for a particular book and give you a tryout. Now, I'm at the stage now where, as often as not, someone will phone me up and say, Malk, got a book for you. Are you free? Can you get this done by the 20th of next month? And sometimes I say yes, and sometimes I say no. And if the 20th of the next month is the most important bit, then they'll go to the next person and give it to them. And if for some reason they or the author really likes my voice, they think I'm a really good fit for this one, then we can usually juggle things around and they'll go for me. But, that's because I've been doing it for quite a long time. In between that, I do get sent requests for auditions sometimes. Usually if it's from a production company I've worked with before, they have a fair idea that I'm a suitable person for it. So there's probably only going to be 2 or 3 other people in the mix. There are other ways to do it. Some of the pay-to-play sites, Voice 123, things like that, they do sometimes have audiobooks on there, but the rates are not always what they should be on those sites.
No. Well, that's really interesting, actually, that you come in, and then as you get more known for your work, then you start to get requested, which I think is the way anything should be, really. If you're a proven quantity, then you should be able. People should recognise that.
One problem right at the moment, of course, is COVID. I mean, don't get me wrong, being a audiobook narrator with a home studio, very fetching black and purple foam tiles in the background there, is a really good place to be. It's not affected by COVID, it's not affected by Brexit, but that's because I've been doing it for about 7 or 8 years. Getting started right now, there's an awful lot of out of work actors who usually do, live stage performance or other live performance, and all of a sudden, a year and a half ago, their industry completely dried up. And although it's starting to come back now, a lot of them decided to try and get a home studio set up and go into home recording. So you have an awful lot of jobbing actors out there who, in the last year or so, have been trying to get audiobook work because they can see it is work that they could potentially get.
Yeah. And I suppose some of them as well, even though they might not be known for their audio work, people may recognize other work that they've done, which gives them that little bit of foothold. Yes, they're as annoying as celebrity authors.
Yeah, well, celebrity authors are a different thing. I don't do my work the same route as Stephen Fry and Michael Sheen, for example, because having their names attached to your book represents a significant chunk of the marketing budget as well.
Yes.
People will get things just because it's Stephen Fry or Michael Sheen or whoever else narrating it. No, there is another in between part. I'm a home-based audiobook narrator. I have a home studio, which I'm sitting in now, a vocal booth in my bedroom. My commute is about 2 feet from getting out of bed.
I have to go all the way to the spare room. Yeah, I know.
Life's harsh, Paul.
Traffic some days.
But you also get, and they are starting to come back online now, having been in hiatus over COVID, like everything else. You have studios where some narrators will go in and they basically sit down in front of a microphone and they start reading, and there's a producer in a studio who, when they make mistakes, they will cover that. I have to do all that myself.
That's going to be my next question, actually, was how about the editing and the producing and stuff like that, whether you work with someone or whether you do that yourself.
Okay. There's 2 different types of editing, and then there's mastering on top of that. First pass editing, basically, which I always do myself, is basically just making sure that what you've read, what you've recorded and send in, is free of most fluff. So any mistakes you notice that you've made, you've cut out. Now, there's 2 ways of doing that. Either you just, every time you mistake, you sort of put a mark in the audio, you sort of clap or something, and there's a little spike in the waveform, so you can go back and edit it, and then you keep reading. Or what I do is a system called punch and roll, where you stop, you move the needle back, and you start recording again. And what happens is the software will play the last 3 or 4 seconds up until the point where you put the needle in the recording, and then you can match the pace and tone, and you just sort of come in straight after that. So that's first pass editing. So it means that basically I'm fairly confident that when I submit each chapter, that it's going to be fairly accurate. After that, you should have someone else proofreading or proof listening, and then editing. Someone else should proof for 2 reasons. First of all, it's as with, I'm sure you know, with proofreading, it's very difficult proofing your own work, because you hear what you intended to say, or you read what you intended to write, more than actually. My problem is actually slightly the opposite. I'm ridiculously picky, so it just takes me far too long. But the other thing is, if you come across a word that you've never actually heard said before, you might have seen it written down loads of times, but you might not realize you've been pronouncing it wrong all these years, whereas a proofer might hear it and correct you. And you find out there's these words that you've been saying one way for years, and apparently that's not it.
What would we do without people like Sir Digby Jones to come and tell us that we're not pronouncing our G's properly?
Yeah, well, this is my professional life. It's but then so after, usually after the proofer, you get sent back a list of corrections, which you then do and send in, and an editor will patch those in, get out any little clicks or mouth noises or clearing a throat, as I just did then, to purely deliberately to demonstrate, you understand. And then they master it to get, they run some automated processes usually, which are tailored to the voice of the person, to get all the sound up to about the same level. So you don't have the thing where, you get to the end of one chapter and it's really loud like this, and then all of a sudden the start of the next chapter is like this. It's all got to be balanced, so it's a nice flowing experience for the listener.
Yeah, it's funny now, Jig. I was just having a look at some of the questions that have come through, and Sam Brownlee actually asked an interesting question, and this is where it's quite amusing. She says, "How did I know that Malk would be a good fit for the DCI Warren Jones books?" Now, the problem was, you see, I never went through the auditioning thing. This is why this whole thing's as fascinating to me as I hope it is to everybody else, because for starters, I never knew I was having audio book done. No one actually told me. I was going to, I think it was the HarperCollins summer get together, and I was on the tube, and I got off the tube, and I noticed that I'd had a whole lot of messages coming through, so I had a look at them, and one of them was an email from my editor who said, "Paul, it's great. I've just been chatting to your voice narrator for the book." She says he's fantastic. And I'm like, "Oh, it looks like I'm having audiobooks done." I'm a little disappointed that I never got to experience that thing. But what was fun, though, of course, is, and to be fair, we have mentioned this before when we've spoken on UK CBC, was my editor Cleo said, "You can have a chat to him if you want," and I was just like, "Oh yes, please." And so we did, didn't we? I can't remember if it was I that phoned you or vice versa, but we had a little bit of a chat about the book. And you were, at the time, the way it worked was that you recorded books 1, 2, and 3, and then book 4, which got you up to date. And then you've come back every year since and done 5, 6, and 7.
Yep.
And and it was a fascinating experience, because it never crossed my mind I'd ever go to audio. I just didn't even think that way. And so there's all sorts of things I hadn't done, which perhaps I should have done, and things I had done, which I probably shouldn't have done. And I think we'll have a little chat about that later on, because I think they're amusing, but they are also quite useful, I think.
To
some of the stuff who's writing.
It makes good anecdote, but also it's quite serious recommendations for writers who, because most new books now, there's a good chance that they will get to audio.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And so I never got that chance. However, what was really interesting was we had a little chat about Warren's Coventry accent, and you'd gone and done some research on YouTube, and you were struggling a bit, weren't you? So you kind of come up with an accent which was close to Coventry. The problem was that I'm not a great model because I've lived away from Coventry for so long that although when I go back and see my parents and stuff, inevitably my accent sort of flips back a bit. I'm not a very good example of a Coventry accent, so I'm afraid you had to go out and live and do your own research.
The thing is with the Coventry accent, it's a bit of an odd one because it's not a very strong accent, especially given that it's bordered by some very strong accents. But there were also some cues in the reactions of the book. Accents are something that get talked about, and it's very clear that most of Warren's workmates in darkest Bedfordshire think he sounds like a Brummie, or possibly someone from the Black Country, which to the eternal chagrin of people who live in the West Midlands, nobody, the other 100% of the population hasn't the faintest idea of the difference between yow yows and yam yams, and they don't care. They just sound like Brummies as far as they're concerned, which if you live in Dudley is horrible. Now, so I actually had to give Warren a little bit more of a Birmingham accent than he really deserved, and every time I get I get a new Warren Jones book and I just listen to refresh my mind. I think, God, I really did him quite Brummie, and I'm surprised that I haven't had more complaints about that. I haven't had any complaints about that, but there is a reason that I did it, because for for people who are not Brummies and not familiar with the accent, and not from Coventry, more to the point, and they're not familiar with the accent, there had to be a trace of something that justified his colleagues saying that he sounds like Lenny Henry, which did actually happen in one of the books. He was very indignant about it. But there was also one thing, one of the books where right at the end, it turned out the bad guy was actually a policeman visiting from another part of the country, and he took the mickey out of Warren and did a little impression of him, and I did a really, really caricatured Brummie accent when he was doing that, because I thought that's what he would do. So it's
you get to have a bit of fun with that. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, when we're talking about the accents, I mean, the obvious question is what's your favorite accent and what's your least favorite accent?
Oh, that's a very, very tricky question. The thing is, I've as I'm talking in normal conversation, I will slip into different accents just depending on what my mood is or what I'm saying. If you want to tell someone that they're doomed, you obviously slip into a Scottish accent because there's no other way of doing it. I think right at the moment, I've got a few real go-to accents. I grew up in Yorkshire, so Yorkshire is one. Sort of vaguely Glaswegian Scottish is a second. I do about 5 different Scottish accents if necessary. The last time I was on one of these with you, Paul, I remember I did a Scottish accent, and someone very indignantly put in the comments, "We don't all sound like bloody Ouija's." I thought, yeah, fair point. But, so there's that. But I think my favourite right now is probably South Welsh. Partly I live in Wales at the moment, although the place I live, Hay-on-Wye, is right on the border. It doesn't have a strong accent. But when I moved here, the solicitor that we used for the conveyancing had a wonderful voice. I'd sometimes phone him up because I needed to talk to him, and he was never there. He'd always be,
of course.
He'd always be in court or something, and his secretary would say, "All right, I'll get him to phone you back." And then a couple of days later, I'd get this phone call, and hello, and there'd be a pause, and then there'd be this, "Oh, Mr. Williams, I am so sorry I didn't get back to you sooner. I had to go and see my boy at the rugby, you see. And I just loved his voice. I could have just sat there and listened to him all afternoon. So again, there's a few Welsh accents that I do, but his is probably the first one that I go to, the first one on my list. Worst, quite possibly North Walian, because I can never sustain it. I've not spent any time in North Wales. I've heard, I recognise North Walian accents when I hear them, but whenever I do them, they just slide south. I did a detective fiction book set in Anglesey once, and I was worried about it when I got cast. I say, you sure about this? Because, it'll sound South Wales. And so I spent quite a long time, looking it up, trying to do it. But some of the Audible reviews say that it's a shame they didn't get a narrator who could actually do a North Walian accent. Yeah, it's a fair cop, that one.
Yeah, it happens to the rest of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean that. Apologies for those who are wondering why I suddenly got a lot closer. I've just my cushion was uncomfortable. Yeah. So it makes me wonder: was the young Malk, the kid at the back of the class, doing all the daft accents, or was it something time after that?
It's a funny thing, that, because I've thought about this when I became interested in accents. I wasn't incredibly keen on accents as a young child, but I was aware of them because I was actually born in Cheshire.
Right.
Would be called Greater Manchester these days, but as far as I and my family are concerned, it's still bloody Cheshire. And so Cheshire's, it's a relatively neutral English accent. It's not far off RP. It's just got a few slightly exaggerated vowel sounds. I've got a cousin from Whaley Bridge in Cheshire, and she's always talks and, oh, hello, oh, Uncle Malk, I do love you. And she's got quite a strong accent. It's usually a bit less than that, but you get the oh, look at this kookery book, that's kind of thing. But so the vowel sounds are slightly exaggerated in some cases, but it's fairly neutral. Then I moved to Whitby in Yorkshire, and Whitby has a really strong. It's not like a normal, what you might think of as a normal Yorkshire accent. Quite flat vowel sounds. Barnsley accent. My granny could catch that in a penny and hit it with a stick of rhubarb. It's not like that. The Whitby accent sort of, oh yeah, there. All right. And I hated it as a 4-year-old child. I couldn't stand it. I remember I have this really vivid memory of when I was 5 years old, just walking to school with my mum, and there was a girl in my class whose mum used to at the other end of our road, and her mum used to walk her to school at the same time, and she'd meet my mum at the bottom of the drive sometimes, and she'd say, "Hey up, Nadine, you're taking Bairns to school?" And I'd be there in my shorts, hands on my hips, little brat. I am not a bairn. I am a child. Thank you very much.
It's funny though how that's a crucial age, because I was born in way up in the northeast, and we found I moved down to Coventry when I was about four years old, and we found a cassette tape which is sadly long since disintegrated, on which you can just about make me out in the background. And I've got full on northeast accent, Sunderland, and then 12 months later, there's another one of me at a birthday party, and I've got, full on West Midlands. And it's fascinating how that age I was able to change, just over the space of a few months, really. And then the accent sort of stayed as it was. I don't think I ever really had a massively strong West Midlands accent. And then my sister's definitely stronger than me, and she's retained it after sort of 20 years up in.
Some people do, yeah. And I think it's partly depends on how close an identity you feel with a place. I mean,
she had a Coventry City supporters ticket. You see, I didn't. So
when I moved down south, I started talking with a Yorkshire accent that I never had when I actually lived in Yorkshire. Just on Yorkshire patriotism.
Yes.
But I did realise when I was a child, when I was probably 10 or 11, I did have a tendency to do what linguists call accommodate. If you're talking to someone who has a strong accent, especially if you like them, if you like them, if you like the way they sound, then you tend to subconsciously mimic them. And I found that I was doing that. And once I started doing it, I kind of had to carry on doing it as long as I was in that company. Otherwise, they'd think I was taking the mick out of them and I could get beaten up. Remember,
I noticed that a bit. I mean, if I'm speaking to someone from Manchester, because I spent a few years up there, I do find my vowels elongating slightly. I found it a very easy way to speak for some reason. I don't know. It's a very relaxed way of talking, Mancunian accent, and maybe that's why it's natural to slip into it a little bit. Now, obviously, with your voice being your tool of trade, do you do anything to look after it to make sure?
I've been to I've done various vocal coaching that tells you how to look after your voice. There was a time when I would religiously do vocal warm-ups before I'd start. I usually do something. I don't like just coming into the booth and starting speaking having not actually uttered another syllable that day. Because as your voice warms up, it changes, and so that's probably going to be told. But yeah, if you overdo it, then you can have a very dry voice by the end of the day. My main thing really is drink a lot of water. I always have a bottle of water. I have a bottle of water these days because when I first started, I would just take like a pint glass or a pint mug of water into the booth and
see where this is going.
Put it on a shelf. And I sometimes, if I'm getting into it, then I gesticulate quite a lot, and you can see what happened all over the place. So was recording away, and I think I kept this. I don't know where the clip is now, but I kept the clip with me. I sent a copy of this little clip to the author concerned, who thought it was hilarious. So
I have to say, I had a similar moment myself actually a few weeks ago. I do online tutoring as well, and I was doing some one-to-one tutoring. Now, we didn't have for safeguarding reasons. The school's policy was that you don't have the webcam on, so we can't see each other. I mean, he's a lovely lad. I've never met him. I don't know what he looks like, but anyway, we're chatting away, and I wanted to. I was trying to. I got a diagram on the screen, and I wanted to emphasize something. And my laptop has a touch screen, so I use a stylus to draw on the screen. And I pick it up and I drop it, and there was literally, you could hear plop. Now, I didn't swear. That's how professional I am as a teacher. I did not swear, but he's killing himself laughing in the background. I'm with this stylus, which is quite an expensive one, comes with the computer, sort of trying to wipe it off. And so it's okay, still working. So yeah, that was a lesson learned. Always make sure that.
Just going back to actually answering your question. So apart from drinking water, and just take a sip of water very regularly. When I do take a break, once I've recorded about an hour or so of audio in the day, I will then take a break and not really say very much. I'll just rest my voice. If I do feel that my voice is getting dry, if my throat's getting scratchy at all, I usually have a spoonful of honey. I usually have a spoonful of Manuka honey. I've no certainty that Manuka honey is actually better for the throat than any other kind of honey, but there were a lot of tests done on Manuka honey specifically, which show that definitely is good for you. So I kind of have it like I'm taking medicine. I will sort of take a teaspoon of that and try and let it sit in the throat for a while and drink more water. I don't usually have very cold water. It's usually room temperature, and it ends up that way because of the laws of thermodynamics. But I have it at room temperature, more or less. I drink tepid water because sometimes the cold can constrict your vocal cords as well. Some people say that you should never drink coffee because it dries the mouth. I am not of that opinion. It may dry the mouth, but I've got to be awake to do this. It's
yeah. I don't drink caffeine, so I mean, this is caffeine-free Diet Coke. This is exciting how exciting my life is. So I don't find I wouldn't have thought coffee would really dry my mouth out purely from the diuretic point of view. I'm not sure what I've never really thought about that. And as a teacher, we were told some stuff how to look after your voice, because of course it's important to teachers as well. But one of the problems we had, particularly with the science teacher, is the whole drinking water thing is a great idea, except you're not allowed to drink in the laboratories. And the other problem that teachers have is if you drink, you need to go for a wee. And as any teacher will tell you, that's very difficult in the school day. You are very defined times when, if you're lucky enough not to be doing a break duty, you might be able to use the bathroom. So perhaps never drunk quite as much as I should have done when I was in the classroom. Which actually brings us on, funny enough, to a question that came up here. Someone did ask if we have a specialist workspace. Now, obviously, you've got your home studio,
yep,
which I believe last year you were building.
Yes, I was. I built this all by myself.
That's impressive.
And it took far longer than I expected. And the next time I have to do this, I will get someone whose job it is to build stuff to do it. There is a reason that I am a voice actor and not a builder, but it does the job. I'm quite pleased with the result, actually.
Yeah, they don't do them in IKEA, sadly. Yes, IKEA voice booth. There'd be a line that would sell. Yeah. Now, for me, do I have a special? Well, yes, I do have an office. It's basically the front of the spare bedroom. We did have a lovely office, and I was working part time. I'd spend a couple of days a week writing and a couple of days a week teaching, and then COVID hit. And my dearly beloved, whose job is far more important than mine, needed the office. So she moved to there and I moved to the kitchen table. Back last September, we moved stuff around in the spare bedroom and got a big, decent table. And I'm now work out of there. It is not this fine background. We're actually in what we call the library, which is actually the end of the living room with the bookshelf. So we put it here because I can have my books behind me and it looks like a very sort of literary kind of thing. In reality, I'm squashed in the corner of the upstairs bedroom with junk all around me and the laundry behind me. But it is my space. It's only me working there, which is great. So yes, I can have everything set up as I need. And it does make life a lot better. I've got we replaced the television, and so I kept the old TV. So that pulls double duty as a very big flat screen monitor. So I've got a laptop and that, which is a nice setup to have, actually, because you can put, if you're editing in particular, you can put documents on one screen and have your references on the other. So it's a nice way of working. So yes, I do have dedicated working space in that sense.
I was just thinking about your backdrop. I know in the age of Zoom, some people have become really self-conscious and also really judgmental about the contents of people's bookcases. If someone's got books behind them, what do you got there?
Oh yeah.
But for you don't have that problem because you just use it as a showcase.
I know. It's so blatant. Yeah, there's no shame here at all. Stick my books up there, and the books that I've got behind me, the top shelf. We started, and now I've got too many, so they tend to get scattered everywhere. We started, that was just books that I got signed at literary festivals and stuff, because I do love that. There's something special about a signed book, particularly if the author has been able to do it for you in person, because it has memories associated with that book.
Yeah.
So that's on the top shelf. Then below it, which you can't really see because I tend to be in the way, are books that are primarily my partner's, because she's got a degree in English literature and is therefore far better read than I am. So if it were just my bookshelf, which is the one up in the corner, it would mostly be Star Trek novels, which, I'm not ashamed of. I'm quite happy to read them. And indeed, if pocketbooks are listening, that would be my dream, contracted to write a Star Trek novel. However, it does look a lot better when you've got classics down there. There's a big dictionary about an anthology of romanticism, for example. I'm not entirely sure what that is, but definitely sounds like the sort of thing that the learned people would read. Now we have been waffling. Well, that means you've been answering questions, and I've been waffling for 45 minutes now. So I'm going to very quickly go through some of the questions that I haven't got a chance to go through.
Yep.
And also, I think we should address a few in the comments as well. Right now, this is a quick one. I think you kind of answered this almost. Do you have to listen back to previous entries in a series, or more precisely, I think, do you keep files with snippets of character voices that you can listen to? So you've got 2 minutes of Warren talking.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's not usually even 2 minutes. It's usually maybe 10, maybe 20 seconds of if I think a character is going to recur, then when I finish the chapter, then I'll just go back and cut out a bit and just save it as, character name .mp3. And sometimes I miss one. Sometimes a character occurs, and I've read the book beforehand, so I know the character doesn't come back again in this book. But then 1 or 2 books later, if it's a series, they come back again. Oh, good bugger! I've come across them before, and it's not in my list. So either I think, okay, is this a really obvious choice that I would have made? And then I go, no, it's not worth it. And so I go back and I will, it doesn't usually take too long because I've always got the manuscript on PDF. So I can always search through for the name, find out what chapter it is, and then find in my archives what chapter it is. But it's a faff that I don't want to have to do. But sometimes if it's just in the same book, if it's a character that appears at the beginning and then appears again at the end, or just that I finish recording on a Friday afternoon and come to it again on Monday morning, what did they sound like again? So I just listen to it back and just get my head in the right space.
That's it. Because with me, I mean, you did essentially 4 books back to back when you first started, but since then it's been every year. So you've got to. I wouldn't imagine for 1 second you can remember exactly how my different characters sounded, particularly some of the minor characters. Now, I think this is useful, certainly for me and for anybody else out there. Is there anything that an author should try and avoid doing to make your job easier?
Okay, let's see. Let's make it more positive. What I think it would benefit authors to do. I think that ideally, most audiobook narrators will say this, it would be good if authors read their work back to themselves out loud. When you get to the end of a chapter or even just a page, read it out loud and make sure you're reading with the punctuation. Because if you just gloss over it, if you're just skimming through, as I alluded to earlier, you tend to see what you think you've written. And if you'd started a sentence in one way and then decided to edit it so that you're using the passive voice or something, then sometimes a pronoun can end up in the wrong place, or a comma can end up in the wrong place, which either changes the meaning or makes it ambiguous. And sometimes it's just the flow. You realize that you've done a sentence that's about 5 lines long and has about 30 commas in it, and or very few commas perhaps, and it makes perfect sense. But if you're actually having to read it out loud, you realize that you can't do that in one breath, not without it sounding stilted. So reading your own work out loud is definitely something to do. As far as describing voices are concerned, it's really useful if, when a character is first introduced, if there's something about the voice, it's good to know it quite early on. Whether it's a regional accent, just to pick a random example. Sorry, we're laughing. If you listen to the time Paul and I did this before, you'll have heard this anecdote. But there's a character, David Hutchinson. David Hutchinson, who's a minor character in the book. Certainly the first couple, he only gets a couple of lines, but there's
Yeah.
a running joke that whenever there's whenever the CID team have got together and are comparing notes and sharing what the evidence is, he's always the first person to put his hand up and ask a question. So he always says something. And there was no, he only said a couple of lines in each book. So there was nothing apart from, he was a detective and he was called David Hutchinson. So they're in Bedfordshire. So he's basically got a home county sort of estuary accent until book 4. No, book 5.
I think I heard about book 5.
Yeah. I was pre-reading book 5, diligently as you do. And there's bloody David Hutchinson, who comes from Newcastle. Oh, does he? Does he indeed? Right. Well, that's interesting. And so I got on to Paul. I sent him a message, which I know Paul delighted in. Where I said, effectively, I think, was it? Forgive me, Father is a good name for this book because, it's probably one of the biggest sins that you can commit upon an audiobook narrator to get to page 163 of the 5th book in the series before you mention that someone might have a Geordie accent. And Paul delightfully retconned an explanation to this. He only speaks in a Geordie accent when he's either in the pub or when Newcastle United are playing, and this has been mentioned in the last couple of books now, which makes me smile every time I see it.
He does get a lot as the books have gone on. Actually, he's become a little bit more integral, and I think it's in part as a series matures. So he's become a bit more, he'll have a bit more work to do. He may even get a bit of Geordie in the 9th book. There is a secret time where he goes and actually speaks to a witness who's from Newcastle. So hope they're teasing me. Your accent sounds a bit stronger, Hutch. So there might be a little bit there.
So accents aren't the only thing. If someone has a deep voice, or if you describe their physicality, if someone's very big, broad-chested, that implies that they have a deep voice. And an audiobook narrator will read through the whole book and just find any cues like that, even if it's not a description of the voice, something about the description. They have got to choose a voice, and if there's nothing there, then the narrator will just pick something that suits them. And if
they have a base in Hertfordshire, then county's accent, there's a good chance, and that was exactly to do with Hutch.
So there's also, to be fair, that the way characters are written, someone who's good at writing dialogue, each character will have a certain pattern, a certain melody to their speech, which comes out when you read it. People have characteristic ways of speaking, and I'm sure that authors are aware of that when they write, the same as audiobook narrators are aware when they read, and they're trying to pick up on that. There tend to be different ways of doing it, and you'll pick a voice that suits you.
I mean, one of the things I think worth addressing as well is that perhaps we sometimes we do things which we don't necessarily think about because we're able to do it these days. For example, my classic faux pas was in the first book where I had a table of data, which seemed sensible and it works very well on the Kindle and in the paperback. Basically, for those who've not read the book, it's a whole load of mobile phone numbers that have been contacting each other. They don't know who they belong to. They're trying to work it out, and the easiest way was to do it the same way they would have done it in the office, which they put it in a table. Of course, your immediate question was, how would you like me to deal with this table? The other one is deliberately misspelled words for characters. For example, who's dyslexic has written a note, and that's the whole point, is it has to be there. So that you had to work your way around that. But more recently, there's been a couple of things which I've considered. And one is, for example, emojis, because they are now in the character sets on ebooks. You can have an emoji on the page, and in fact, the emoji is actually, if you like, part of the story. That if you're referencing a text that they've written and they've written an emoji, then it seems sensible to have it. How are you going to deal with that one?
Well, and if it's just a single emoji, then I'd probably read it and just say either just smiley face or at the end of the line there was a smiley face with one eyebrow raised or wearing a monocle or whatever. If there were a lot of them, then again I'd probably just write something to describe the effect, or say, or if the exact sequence of them is going to be important, then say that. But it's something that I would get in touch with the author if I could, and it's not always possible, and discuss that with them and say, how would you like me to do this? It's something that happens in a slightly different way quite a lot in non-fiction books, where you get graphs and diagrams, and sometimes you can ignore them. Sometimes it's just for when you have some dense text, and it's just to make it easier for the reader to visualize. But if the text doesn't refer directly to the graph or diagram, you can ignore it.
Yeah.
But if it does, then I actually have to describe the diagram. Now, ideally, I'd rather like someone else to write that for me, although I used to be a technical writer, so I'm actually fairly good at that kind of thing. So yeah, writing it yourself and describing line graphs. There's a book I did a couple of years ago called Net Zero, which is a really fascinating book if you're interested in what we might be able to do to solve the climate crisis. Fascinating, but there are quite a few graphs in that I had to come up with descriptions for and do myself.
It's a specific skill at GCSE is describing graphs, and it's something that some students can find quite challenging. So yeah, but I mean, you being a technical writer must be a big bonus there.
That does help.
I mean, so just quickly going on, I'm conscious that we've got quite a few questions that folks have asked us. So there's one here. Someone made the point that God help a narrator that has to do a specific Northern Irish accent. They're so different even from one side of the city to another. I must admit, I can generally tell the difference between whether someone's from Northern Ireland or Southern Ireland. But yes, I wouldn't be able to tell you where from Northern Ireland. I mean, how do you feel? Have you done many Northern Irish accents?
I've done some. I remember when I was at university, the first Irish accent that I sort of got in my head, and that was my go-to Irish accent, turned out to be a Northern Irish accent. And someone pointed this out to me. I was like, "Oh, is that what I'm doing? Fantastic!" That's something I didn't realise. No, I did a book quite recently. It was a classic. It was a thriller, quite an old one, that's been reprinted. But yeah, some of it was set in Northern Ireland in the 70s during the Troubles, and there are a couple of people. One of the main characters had a Dublin accent, and the others had a variety of Northern Irish accents. And in all honesty, I fudged it. I didn't go and look at exactly, because it wasn't saying, this person was from the west end of Shankill Road. I don't even know if the Shankill Road goes from west to east or north to south. I don't know. But and if there were very specific things, then it may be that people in Belfast and the surrounding area will listen to it and say, well, that's just nonsense. But I can if that's the case, I'll hold my hands up, and that's fine. But it's generally somewhat impressionistic, really, by which I mean impressionistic as in the art movement, where things are quite vague rather than me doing an impression of a specific person. The thing with audiobooks is everyone knows that it is one person doing all the voices. So no one is really expecting a completely unrecognizable character voice for each one. They're all variations on my own voice. But yeah, I'm not going to do it right now because it takes me a little while to warm up to get into a convincing, especially Northern Irish accent. It usually starts with the word "nigh," and I work out from there.
Goes from there. I must admit, my experience, people who do like to pick holes in accents on TV with their local accent, but actually they get tremendous pleasure out of it. My dad, I mean, anybody who on the screen supposedly from Devon. Well, I mean, my dad's from proper rural Devon as well. So, he'll just pick it apart. And, I think that was the main reason he watched Broadchurch, was to pick apart the Devon accents. So, yeah. So I wouldn't lose too much sleep over it. I think even when they put it online, I think it's more of a, they're a sort of fondness more than anything else, I suppose, unless you make something really offensive error that's really upset them. I think we are really getting close to the end here, but we could probably ask one or two others.
Well, just to answer one that I can just see on the screen.
Oh, yeah.
I can do a Geordie accent, yes. I also, as well as storytelling and audiobook narrating, I also do folk singing. And there is one of my favourite folk songs is called Sally Wheatley, and it has to be sung in a Geordie accent because otherwise the rhymes don't make sense. I'm trying to remember one, but you've got to rhyme Wheatley and neatly with Greetly. Yes, you didn't shove it here and fettle Wheatley. So yes, I can do a Geordie accent, and I can sing in a Geordie accent as well, quite creditably.
Sam asked if I could do one. The answer to that is I think I can, and then the answer to the unspoken question, no, I'm not going to. I don't want to, because otherwise this video will come back and haunt me in years to come. So no, I shall not be attempting a Geordie accent live on air. Just looking at a couple of others. Someone asked me a question here about a couple about my book specifically. So somebody called Facebook User, whose parents must have had a great sense of humor, said, when people read your books, do the readers have to start at the first novel, or can the reader dip in at a later book? Well, actually, the books, and I think Malk's a good person to tell me whether I'm right or wrong on this. Generally speaking, they could be read as standalones, couldn't they?
Yeah.
And I think I would always say that. I think with any series, if the sooner you could start in the series, the better, because it is inevitable. The characters evolve, they move on. There are big events that happen in some books which do change the landscape for the later books, and obviously, I do like those big events to be a surprise. I don't want you necessarily to see it coming. So obviously, if you've read a later book in a series, then it's not going to be a big surprise for you. But no, if you're struggling, you can go straight in there. If you are moving away straight from the audiobooks, because these aren't recorded audiobooks, if you're looking for something short to read, just to see do you like my writing style, do you like the characters, then look for any of the novellas. So there's 4 novellas. There's Blood is Thicker Than Water, A Case Gone Cold, A Deadly Lesson, and the final one, which is just briefly left at first glance. Any of those, they're relatively short, quick reads, so you can jump in and just see whether you like my writing style or not. Somebody asked a question about whether books are available in Kindle. Yes, they are all available in Kindle. Obviously, the novellas are Kindle only. The 7 full lengths are available also as paperback, and because of Malk's work, they're also available as audio. The second half of their question is how long it takes to write a book, starting with the drafts, then editor, etc. Right. Well, it does vary. So I've had books that have took me better part of a year to write my first draft down. The one I'm writing at the moment next year just seems to have just took off. I wrote 60,000 words in a month, which is a lot of words in a month. So that varies enormously. But once the manuscript has been submitted, well, my first complete draft of my manuscript has been done. I've gone through it a couple of times. I'm happy with it. I think it's basically, I always say, it's a story. You can read it from beginning to end. Hopefully you'll enjoy it as a story, but it is not finished yet. It's not polished. it goes off to beta readers. So my beta readers are my fiance and both my parents. They will all read them, give me feedback. Can be something like bits I can cut. For example, if I think I've got too many words, they're very good at spotting not so much errors, but sometimes where there needs to be more clarity. So, for example, where they put question marks next to something, and I think, well, if them reading it, they haven't picked up what I meant to say there, then I do need to go back and look at that again, because obviously, I wouldn't say they are atypical of people who are going to read my books. So if they've not got it, then probably my readers aren't going to get it. They make suggestions on plot and stuff as well. That takes a month or so. I then go through it a couple more times, put in theirs, and then it's submitted. And then it's basically a couple of months later, it'll come back from my editor with her first set of what we call structural edits, which is where she said, that will be then right. Okay, so I think to improve this book, you need some more of this, a little less of this. Perhaps this needs to happen quicker. Maybe put this bit sooner, or hold this back bit. There's this sort of structural, literally moving things around. So I'll do that, go back to my editor. Fingers crossed, they're happy with what I've done. Then it goes through to some of the more copy editing stages. This is where they've gone through. They've rigorously applied the HarperCollins style guide, for example. So when people are complaining about why an author's using Americanized spelling, it's because that's their publisher's style guide. Somebody's made
commas.
Sorry?
Or Oxford commas.
Yeah, exactly. Oxford commas. Oh, I love them. I use them all the time. Me and that's semicolons. Scatter them liberally. So once we've done that, then you go through again, and there may still be a bit more editing to and fro with your editor, and then finally it will go to what we call proofreading. There are really technical terms about exactly what each of these things are, but the term proofreading is a general catch-all term, really. And that person is going to pick out the spelling mistakes. They've never seen the book before. You and your editor by now may well be reading what they expect to see. And it's your proofreader who's never seen it before who goes through and spots a lot of small things. We're talking, my favorite by far is the first book where I had a character who, when he was nervous, would take his glasses off and wipe them on his tie as he's talking. And my proofreader had written, when did he put his glasses back on again? That's because he took them off 3 pages previously, wiped them on his tie, and then I'd never explicitly said that he put them back on again. So when I later on said that he took his glasses off and wiped them on his tie, which, to be fair, is repetitious anyway, she was like, well, when did he put them back on again? They spot those things, and they're very, very good. I mean, people do complain on our UK Crime Book Club as much as anything about, this book was littered with errors. Actually, the book's 100,000 words. If there are fewer than 100 errors in that book, that's better than 0.1% error rate. That's 99.9% correct, which in most industries is usually regarded as pretty good. So the proofreaders do a magnificent job. Bits will get through. And then finally, once that's been done, then generally speaking, that's my contribution pretty much over to the book. It goes off to be page set for the Kindle and also for obviously paperback. Malk will usually get it a couple of months before publication date, usually, isn't it?
Yeah, before the paperback one. Now we've got to this point where I think I am a part of the process, because you're on book 7 since I did the first 4, which were done in retrospect. But yeah, they usually they know they want me to do it. They know when the publication date is, and they will usually try to get in touch to make sure that I've got a gap in my schedule, so that I can get that in for the date they want. Sometimes audiobooks are very much a last minute thought, and we want to get an audiobook out on the same day that the paperback, or sometimes even the hardback, comes out. When does it come out? 2 weeks. Can someone do this in 2 weeks? you'll be lucky.
Theoretically,
And they get really snotty about the deadline. It's, oh no, there's no wriggle room. You know, if everything got all the marketing stuff and it gets launched on this day. Yeah, well, maybe you should have thought about that earlier. That's not my problem. Good. Except it kind of is your problem if you agree to do it, because you know, it's then your professional reputation on the line to get it done and done properly.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yes, it's not my error, your error. Yeah. Right. Well, look. I mean, we could go on all night, I'm sure. Evidence has suggested that in the past, that once we log off, we could keep on nattering. However, I'm conscious of the fact that we've had well over an hour. Right. Well, I've really enjoyed it.
Do I have time for a quick plug?
Oh, of course. I apologise. Yes, because we've been talking about people getting into this.
Yeah.
But also, we forgot to mention the flip side, which is how authors can get their books done if you own the rights. Yeah. Sorry.
Yes, indeed. And the thing I mentioned before, ACX, is one way of doing it. It's a way a lot of people do it. However, I know that there are quite a few people who do crime writing themselves and possibly self-publish or possibly want to get published and are interested in audiobooks. I'm actually part of a collective, a partnership called Raconteurs. There's 7 core members. We're all really experienced British audiobook narrators. You know, everyone, all of us have over 100 audiobooks. We've been doing it for a number of years, and most of us have between 30 and 50 crime fiction books to our name, so we're pretty experienced in this. If we actively want, as a group, to specialize in doing crime fiction audiobooks, we had to think about this, the sort of stuff that all of us in the core group could do. And there are other people. We know most of the audiobook narrators between us in the country, so we have quite a wide pool to cast from. But if you would be interested in getting your book done as an audiobook, and you would like our help to do so, if you can get in touch with raconteurs.co.uk is our website. We're also on Facebook. Raconteurs Audio, I think, is the Facebook name, and also on Twitter. So if you'd like to
Raconteurs spell? Yeah, how's Raconteurs spell? Is it the proper French spelling?
Yes, it is RACONTEURS.co.uk.
So don't forget that practical U at the end.
RACONTEURS.co.uk.
I would imagine if you put some variation of Raconteurs and audio book into Google, Google's pretty clever. It will figure it out. Yes.
Thank you, Samantha.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Sam. Yeah. So definitely, I can't recommend it enough. I mean, I've been absolutely delighted with what Malk has done with my books. I really have. It's something I knew very little about, and then I've gone and I've listened to them all. I've been lucky enough to listen to Out of Sight, which is due out on Thursday. Malk very kindly sent me a pre-recording so I could listen to it before this talk. And again, he's done an absolutely lovely job of it. But yeah, any authors out there who are independently authored writers, or they have retained their own rights to the audio, certainly I would highly recommend it. It's a great way of getting your work out to a wider audience. You know, there's something very special actually about hearing your book being read by somebody else like that. So yes, I apologize. Because I nearly forgot to mention that. So again, thank you, Malk. I've really enjoyed this evening. Thank you for Sam Brownlee, who has been doing all the technical support behind there, and a big thank you to all of you who've listened and popped your questions in the box. So have a pleasant evening, and I will hopefully speak sometime in the future.
Thanks very much, Paul, and thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.